Greetings from the Asian Productivity Organization in Tokyo, and welcome to another session of Productivity Talk. We have been broadcasting about 40 sessions by now. We have featured about 50 expert or resource persons, and so far we are lucky that we have been having more than 36,000 views so far. And today it is my pleasure, I have the pleasant task of introducing another very inspiring speaker, and we are also actually exploring another exciting topic. Joining me for this session is Mr. Benjamin Abadiano. He is from the Philippines, and he is actually a very distinguished person. And among others, he was a recipient of the prestigious Ramon Magsaysay Award that was bestowed to him in 2004 for the category of Emergent Leader. And I would like to introduce and invite now, I would call him Benjamin. And Ben, thank you so much for joining us. Magandang umaga sa inyong lahat. Mabuhay. And may I invite you just to introduce yourself first, Ben, please.
Thank you also for inviting me to this forum organized by the Asian Productivity Organization. I'm currently working in Assisi Development Foundation here in the Philippines, and our work is with the indigenous peoples and other sectors of society, especially the families that are living in extreme poverty. We have this program currently implemented, which is also aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And one of the sectors that we are focusing on is the indigenous peoples. And this year is my 32nd year in development work. I started my engaging in development work in 1988 with the indigenous peoples of Mindoro Island in the Philippines. And I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon to share with you our experiences in promoting inclusivity and productivity here in the Philippines.
Thank you very much, Ben. And yes, indeed, that we are actually productivity. Now also we are moving, trying also to be inclusive. And this is a very good opportunity for us to learn from you the application of what we call inclusive. And to the viewers, I would like to just briefly introduce the what Ben has been doing, and also the topic today. His topic will be inclusive education, and there will be the case of the indigenous peoples and the experiences of the Philippines. And here we are promoting actually also inclusive productivity. So from Ben's experience, the Philippines experience, we would like to listen, we would like to learn how we would be able to connect between you and I. So Ben, with that introduction, may I invite you to start with the presentation, please?
I hope that my sharing, but to start with, I would like to thank the Asian Productivity Organization for inviting me in this afternoon's gathering. I hope that my sharing will further attest to the belief that the indigenous peoples have a great capacity to make a significant contribution in responding to societal challenges, and nation building at the same time, given the given the if they are given the right opportunities to hone their knowledge and skills, particularly on indigenous knowledge systems and practices, in promoting sustainable living. The Philippines is a culturally diverse country with an estimated 12 to 14 million indigenous peoples belonging to 100 ethno-linguistic groups. Most of the indigenous peoples live in the ancestral territories, both inland and coastal areas, since time immemorial. They are considered as custodians of our rich land and natural resources, and also considered as holders of rich and diverse traditional knowledge systems and practices. Until now, they continue to be an invaluable resource that benefit not only their communities but the nation as a whole. With regards to legal framework that supports the IPs, it was only in 1987 that the rights have been enshrined in our Constitution. And 10 years after that, the government have this special law that is recognizing the rights of the indigenous peoples, which we call the IPRA law. No, and it was approved in 1997. And this particular law is what is now being used by both government and different sectors in terms of accompanying the indigenous peoples. However, despite of this present law or that has been approved and by the government, many of them continue to live in varying levels, systematic discrimination and exclusion from many political and economic power holders. Their basic rights are trampled upon. They are disenfranchised from the ancestral lands. Their fundamental rights to live in peace and human security are violated. As a result, most indigenous peoples remain in abject poverty. The indigenous peoples in the Philippines have long been neglected, isolated, and overtaken by development. In terms of sociocultural environment, through the years, they have experienced the intrusion of settlers into their ancestral territories, the destruction of their habitats, and the flight into the deep recesses of the mountains, away from the search of basic social services. The right to their land is central to them because for them, land is life. Without land, they struggle and fight for survival in life. In terms of health situation, the destruction of their habitats, which is actually sources of food, traditional and alternative medicines, affect the health and nutrition of the IPs. The health and wellness of the IPs are also affected by the loss of traditional knowledge in alternative health and medicine. External knowledge and means brought by settlers into their community also pose a threat. The entry and introduction of non-traditional medicines and health practices also contribute to the weakening of the community's health system. The poverty of the community also contributes to the presence and existence of sickness and disease. Basic health services of the government do not reach the IPs because many of their areas is too far and difficult to reach. There is a problem with security and peace because of armed conflict. No funds no enough funds are allocated, and there is no specific plan or program in the Department of Health intended to benefit the indigenous peoples. Now, in terms of livelihood and development aggression, the livelihood of the indigenous peoples are affected by the following. One is security and peace issues. I have mentioned a while ago that there's still a presence of armed men, in the area. Second is population migration and land loss. Thirdly, forest degradation and soil erosion. And fourthly, government and private sector policies like um, the large scale implementation of large scale agricultural plantations, mining, and illegal logging. The small upland IP farmers is very vulnerable to economic shocks, making it more difficult to extend beyond survival patterns and resist plantation projects. The growing need of the IPs for cash for them to be able to support education, health, and food inputs also motivates them to search for increasing sources of income. Many IPs fear that they will be dispossessed of their land. Those that do possess or own land have difficulty achieving profitability as they lack working capital, credit, bargaining power with traders, and market information. Now, in terms of education, the existing formal educational system is not helping and serving the interests of the indigenous peoples. Now is the time for the IPs to articulate the kind of educational system that is responsive, relevant, and more importantly, inclusive. Education should be linked with the IP's initiatives to exercise their rights over their ancestral lands, to have an impact on the lives of the IPs. Education should be geared towards the empowerment of the IPs in exercising their right to self-determination. But due to their lack of education and inability to speak the language of law and power, the IPs have been relegated to the fringes of society. Little, if any at all, voices in national politics and have been excluded in major development plans, both in the local and national levels. Given the multifaceted challenges faced by the IPs, it is important to address the following issues: the lack of vocational opportunities, both formal and non-formal instruments, and the critical need for a responsive, relevant, and inclusive education and formation programs for the IPs. In several occasions and dialogues we had with the IPs nationwide, they openly expressed their great dream and need to make education more inclusive, relevant, and responsive to the challenges of the present and future generation, and to produce indigenous children and youth graduates equipped with new skills, knowledge, and ideals that are grounded on the values of their own social and cultural contexts and realities. Indeed, their dream speaks about the longing to have a part, a share, and a contribution to the pursuit of unity and development of their communities and the nation as a whole. So, what is inclusive education for the indigenous peoples? From their perspective, inclusive education is first and foremost a recognition and a response to their rights to quality, relevant, responsive, and meaningful education, which promotes their inherent values, wisdom, lifeways, systems, and practices within the context of their culture, histories, identities, and realities. Our proactive response to the IP's articulated dream of a culturally responsive, inclusive, and relevant education program is the establishment of the Pamulaan Center for Indigenous Education. It is a dream that speaks about the IP's awareness and how important inclusive education is for socio-cultural and economic development and for building a sustainable and resilient future. Now, what is Pamulaan? Pamulaan is a lumad matigsalog term for seedbed. The term stresses the fundamental commitment to root the development of the IP learners in the realities of their life and culture. The Pamulaan Center for Indigenous Peoples Education was established in 2005 as a product of a collaborative effort between the University of Southeastern Philippines, the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, the Lawan Center for Volunteerism and Leadership, the Assisi Development Foundation, Cardwell Foundation, and the Ramon Magsaysay Award Foundation, and other various indigenous groups in the country. Its mission is to create culturally appropriate and relevant pathways on lifelong learning for indigenous children, youth, leaders, teachers, community facilitators, and development workers. Its goal is to produce graduates equipped with knowledge, skills, and values on transformative leadership, to initiate collaborative actions that promote commitment on cultural integrity, environmental responsibility, socio and economic sustainability, grounded spirituality, and community service towards building resilient and sustainable communities. Pamulaan provides a variety of school and community-based academic and non-academic formation addressing the critical needs of various indigenous communities. One program is on elementary and high school program. It is a formal elementary and secondary education programs using an enriched or indigenized curriculum of the Department of Education. It operates on the principle of respect for and recognition of the indigenous people's life and culture. Another program is the college education for the IPs. Through a ladderized educational approach, the program offers both full-time degree courses as well as short-term training courses. Each course can be credited towards earning a 2-year associate degree program and a 4-year bachelor's degree. Pamulaan uses a cycle of learning system that starts from the experience leading to theory, application, evaluation, and reflection. It is a system where students attend academic sessions in the college or in the center, while their practical training and application are done in the indigenous communities. Another program is what we call IP-led or IP-led Academy. It's the Indigenous Peoples Leadership Development Academy. It is a mobile learning system that brings together indigenous leaders across the Philippines. It creates pathways of learning that build and strengthen the IP's leadership potentials and capacities. It employs a dynamic learning process through meaningful skills development, articulation of values and vision, identification of current issues, challenges, and opportunities to create positive change and meaningful development in their communities. Another program is the IP Cares for Indigenous Peoples Center for Agricultural Research and Ecological Sustainability. Its mandate is to help Indigenous farmers and youth enhance their knowledge and skills on sustainable agriculture, technology, environmental protection, enhancement, and sustainability of their ancestral domain. IP Cares conducts studies in the areas of traditional and ecological knowledge and systems, agricultural ecology, anthropology of upland development, natural resources management, organic farming system, agri-economics, marketing, climate change, and disaster preparedness and management, and policy analysis. Another program is LEAP for Leaders in Education Advancement Program. It provides ongoing formation and training program for facilitators, educators, para-teachers, education managers, and IP education councils regarding IP education systems and management. Another program is the IVS or the Ilawan Volunteer Service. Its main thrust has been anchored on the belief that each and every Filipino, whether rich or poor, is endowed with so much talents and abilities, as well as the capacity and the heart to serve others. For the past 15 years, hundreds of IVS volunteers were assigned to various Indigenous people schools and communities all over the country. For a period of at least 1 year, the will serve as community facilitators, organizers, educators, agriculturists, health aides, environmentalists, livelihood managers and officers, and IP advocates. Another program is what we call the YIPIs, for young Indigenous peoples empowered to act for community engagement. It is a youth forum composed of more than 100 organizations nationwide. It has become a platform for young IPs in addressing opportunities for collaborative work in transforming their communities towards sustainable living. Every year, it gathers IP youths nationwide to participate in the National Indigenous Leadership Congress, which we call Kalindugan. Another program is the SEED program for social entrepreneurship and economic development. It creates mechanisms for sustainable livelihoods for the IPs through community-based social enterprises. It established Advocafe, a coffee shop, and an enterprise which serve as at the same time as a marketing arm in promoting locally produced products from various IP communities. Now, what makes Pamulaan innovative and inclusive? Pamulaan is both innovative and inclusive in many different ways because of the mode of partnership in working relationship among peoples and institutions that provide ample space and opportunity for creativity, flexibility, mutual trust, and support. Its various programs were jointly designed by the university professors, the knowledge bearers, and leaders from various indigenous groups in the country, IP advocates, and practitioners on various fields. The collaboration produced an educational environment that is truly inclusive, respects, and recognizes the unique contribution and strength of each member in the partnership. Pamulaan, indeed, is a living testimony for the praxis of the principles involved in the value of inclusivity in diversity. Now, in terms of the impact of this program to the indigenous peoples, since its establishment in 2005, Pamulaan have produced hundreds of college graduates under five programs. One is the bachelor's degree course in development anthropology. Second is basic indigenous education, specializes on indigenous education. Agricultural technology, peace and multicultural studies, social entrepreneurship, and thousands of trainees completed on short-term leadership and skills training on culture-sensitive healthcare, sustainable agriculture, organizational development, environment and natural resources management, social entrepreneurship, and community-based heritage center management. At present, we can find Pamulaan graduates working in various government agencies as full-time teachers, administrators, the Department of Education, as in-house anthropologists and researchers in the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, as agriculturists and community development workers in local government units. Some graduates are engaged in development work either in their own respective communities or in other IP communities as community facilitators, teachers, organizers, agriculturists, entrepreneurs, health workers, volunteers, and community development initiators. Graduates, on the other hand, graduates on short-term courses, leadership like leadership skills, are actively involved in implementing various initiated development programs and projects. And they were also tapped as resource persons in the conduct of skills training and formation in several IP communities. On terms of the evaluation sessions we conducted recently by members of the Alumni Association of Pamulaan, the graduates acknowledged that the formation they received have tremendously contributed to where and what they are now. Pamulaan honed their knowledge and skills on various fields, deepened and strengthened their awareness and appreciation of their values and wisdom in various aspects of their life, cultures, and traditions as indigenous peoples. Another very significant milestones in the Pamulaan journey is the involvement of many of its graduates in doing its work and mission. For the past 15 years, about 90% of the personnel and staff of Pamulaan are already its own graduates. They serve as formators, lecturers, facilitators, agricultural managers, teachers, and development workers. Now that we are already on our 15th year, where are we going? Being a natural, Pamulaan is, since we are one of the pioneers in inclusive education in the Philippines, we believe that being a natural hub on inclusive education for the IPs and IP advocates, Pamulaan is now thinking of creating a mechanism for the institutionalization of its various initiatives. Pamulaan today is a beacon of hope. In the coming years, it will continue to serve more IPs, true to its name, like a fertile seedbed, planted well in the seedbed. The indigenous children, youth, elders, and development workers, as well as the generation ahead of them, can look forward to a future where there is abundance for their families, communities, and their culture. Thank you so much. Maraming salamat.
I think in a short span of 15 years, you have actually achieved a lot. In fact, you achieve so much. And here, actually, there is a nexus, a very strong nexus between what you are doing and what we are trying also to promote. Uh, in our case, that we are inclusive, we are trying to be inclusive, but at the same time, later on, it also we are trying to prepare what we call quality workforce, and education here will be one of the very important foundations. And I think we can connect also to the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, and that is goal number 4. And actually, quality education, inclusive education. So I think that we have commonalities, and my interest here is how do we build synergy. So Ben, let me just ask a few questions that we have received from the our viewers. We have received a couple of questions, and allow me to read the first one that we have received, and this is from Jisuk Lee from Korea, and it mentioned that in the US they have this affirmative action to protect minorities. And the question is there any similar action in the Philippines to protect the indigenous peoples? So that is from Jisukli.
Okay. The most im- important instrument that we have in the Philippines that protect the rights of the indigenous peoples is the IPRA law. And I think I made mention in my sharing that it was in 1997 that that finally the government has created a specific law, which was actually the first in the world. And later on, it inspired other countries, even the United Nations, to come up with their own DRIP. But before the own DRIP, we have the IPRA law that protects the rights of the indigenous peoples. And as a response to that, we also organize ourselves, like you know, like the in civil society organizations in partnership with a number of indigenous communities, indigenous organizations. We come together regularly to discuss specific issues and concerns, to be able to protect the rights of the indigenous peoples. And we have this regular dialogue and consultation. And it was actually initiated by us, and eventually we turned it over to the government. But again, it's back to us now. So every so often we come together and discuss different issues and concerns, and even learn from one another how we can continuously support the IP's struggle in protecting their rights as a people.
Thank you very much, Ben. And I think, like in the example of the Philippines, uh, diversity is given, but perhaps harmony is not. And that is why that we need to really strive and to have this what you call consultation, that process of communication, and that will be very important. And of course, diversity also means tolerating differences. And here we receive a question. uh, the name is Nakayama Hideyuki, and the question it is not easy to handle differences In addition to protecting the indigenous people, what other social protections are there in terms of law? And in terms of education, what systematic actions are being taken? So this question is from Nakayama Hidayuki.
We are very, very happy to tell you that for now, finally, the government has recognized the importance of recognizing the rights of the indigenous peoples on indigenous education, an education that is rooted on their life and culture. That is why 10 years ago, the Department of Education in our government organized a, a technical working group to come up with a policy framework that can be instituted within the government, within the Department of Education. And this has been approved already and implemented for the past 6 years. I was personally involved in crafting this national framework on indigenous education, which will be implemented both in public schools and private schools. And because of this, we become more inspired in s- in promoting inclusive indigenous education, because at this time around we have the legal instrument that that supports our advocacy, that supports the indigenous people's dream of a culture sensitive culture sensitive education program for them.
Yes, Ben, I think here what you are emphasizing is the importance of being rooted to the culture. I think that is what is a very important consideration or factors that uh, give birth to this initiative. And given the many ethnics or the different groups that is in the Philippines, uh, there is a question by Daniel Kim, and it says that what I can see in your presentation is that indigenous people try to do activities together, but I don't see integration efforts. And the question is that, correct me if I'm wrong, whether this really leads to integration, if at all.
Okay. Yes, definitely yes. But for many years, if you are familiar with our history in the Philippines, we have been colonized by many countries for many years, and therefore the identity of indigenous peoples are not highlighted, because even our general education system, it's promoting western kind of education, and therefore our sense of identity as Filipinos is not that strong anymore. And we are very grateful that the indigenous peoples of the Philippines still have that value present in their life. And therefore, we would like to highlight that, because they are actually the soul of our country. The indigenous peoples are the soul of the Philippines, because they represent the real identity of who we are, or who we were before the coming of the colonizers. And so what we are trying to do is also to highlight this indigeneity of the IPs, and how they can influence the Philippine society instead of the westernized Philippine society influencing the IPs. What we are trying to promote is how the IPs can also influence the greater society using their indigenous knowledge, especially in taking care of the environment, in their culture of oneness. Because we have lost that as a country, because we've been very westernized. So we would like to emphasize how the indigenous peoples can also contribute to the total development of the country. And I think even this pandemic that we are experiencing now, we realize that the IPs are actually much better compared to us because they still have the indigenous knowledge with them that we could learn from and how to survive, how to live in a more resilient society. And so I think the integration there should be in a two-way. It's not just the IPs to be integrated to the mainstream, but it's also trying to how to influence or to contribute the indigenous people's knowledge, can contribute to the bigger society so that our development will become more meaningful because it is rooted to our own identity, to our culture as a people. We will not just be copying, borrowing the cultures of the Western, of the outsiders, because there's so much wealth within the country. And as I have said, you cannot see that much anymore in the mainstream society, but you can see that in the more simple and traditional communities like the indigenous peoples.
Thank you very much, Ben. Let me follow up from this point that you have mentioned, and that is how do we connect it with the reality of the economic situation nowadays? To many, for
Um,
example, uh, it means, for example, that study English, master English language, then you go overseas, you work overseas, then you save money, and that is actually, some or quite a large group actually believe that is the pathway, uh, given the economic situation of the present day. Yeah, and how would you think that the IPs in the experiences of the Philippines would adapt to this kind of situation?
okay. Um, that's exactly the reason why we put up the Pamulaan Center. Because the indigenous peoples themselves would like to have a kind of education that prepares them for the present and the future generation. Therefore, they would like to learn, to prepare themselves on in responding to the new challenges, the new skills that are required for them to be able to face the new kinds of challenges and the new culture that they are facing. But again, it's not just about acquiring new skills, but also learning from what they have, starting from where they are, strengthening, enriching of what they have by looking at what they could learn also from the new and modern society. And that's why the Pamulaan Center tries to balance that out. We provide avenues where they could reflect on their values, the things that are functional in their culture, and see how it can be balanced on the new culture, the new knowledge that they need to survive, that they need to continue in living a more sustainable life, not only for the current generation, but also for the next. And so that's the reason why the IPs were dreaming of having graduates from among themselves, not just professionals, but graduates that are also rooted on their culture, graduates that are very capable of facing the new challenges of society and the realities of the modern world, but at the same time, not forgetting of who they are, especially their value systems. Because that is what they feel is very important. It's not just about earning money, but also helping not just themselves, but also the community. Because the indigenous peoples are very communitarian. They are concerned
Mm.
not only about their own lives, but also the lives of other people. And I'm very happy to see that in our graduates. Many of them, until now, while they strive to survive in the mainstream society, they try to find ways and means to be able to continue to help their own communities. One concrete example of that is, with what had happened in the past months. Many of our graduates who are working in the different fields of, or in, yeah, and working in both in government and in non-government organizations, they try to come up with programs and projects that they can do together to support the communities that are suffering. And many of them continue to, you know, to improve their lives, to improve their skills. And in fact, I'm very happy that a month from now, one of our graduates will be going to Belgium to study her master's degree in development anthropology. And she's one of our first graduates in development anthropology in Pamulaan. And there are many of them, who are really doing great work in their own fields. And but again, trying to integrate what they have learned from the mainstream society to what they learned from their ancestors, from their parents. Because I think that's the real essence of development, of sustainable living. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I think what you are saying in short is that the core or the soul is most important there. Yeah, whatever changes in the context of the economy, as long as you have the core remains and strongly rooted. I think that is what the intention of the Pamulaan College. Let me continue. I have actually quite a number of questions here with me, and let me start actually from our friend Nathan Walker. And it says that in the US, we have a lot more suicide rate for American Indians or the Native Americans. And that is a serious concern. And what is the government of the Philippines doing for this kind of possibility?
Um, that is not a, as far as I know, we don't have that kind of problem in the Philippines. Uh, Maybe because the indigenous peoples here and even the mainstream society are very close to their family. It's a close knit, um, community. They're very, the bonding within family and communities is still very strong. And what they're facing more is the 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 influx of lowlanders, the influx of development, organizations that are going into their areas, um, taking away their lands, And I think that's the more important problem that they're facing right now. Uh, I
Mhm.
couldn't, I have not heard any IPs who are into, problems of, I call that, just like
Suicide.
the problem that you mentioned.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. I think that is a very encouraging. It's a very different being communal, being close to one another, and you immediately have actually the community, the society to be with you. And let me continue, Ben. I still have so many questions here, and I have two questions here, and both relate to government roles. Yeah, let me read from the viewer Andhra Pradesh, and it says that in many countries, when we have changes of governments, the policies change. And do you believe that this policy is favorable to the indigenous peoples can be consistent? And that is one. And another one, I will continue with Kimura Kentaro. And it also questioned the role of government. And it says that wealth gap is already there, and the indigenous peoples must be in a dire situation. So then the question is, how can the government help them when the resources are not enough or not well allocated? Let's start with Andhra Pradesh, and this relates to the changes of government and whether the policies will continue and be consistent. Please, Ben.
Okay. Okay. That's a very real thing here in the Philippines. We have very beautiful laws, beautiful policies. The problem is in the implementation. That's why, if there are new leadership that is coming in, the possibility is, the continuity, not to continue or to continue the programs. That's a big problem. And that's why the important thing is how you strengthen the leadership capacity of the people. Because no matter who are the leaders in the in their locality or in the country, if the people can really can advocate for what is right, and to continue what they have started, and that's very important. So empowering the IPs is very important. That's why we are also looking into how we can further strengthen the capacity program that we are providing for, with the indigenous peoples. And the the reality also is that there are a lot of conflicting laws within the government system, because the indigenous peoples are subject of, these laws from the different departments, like the Department of Agriculture, Department of Land Reform, the Department of Natural Resources, and the National Commission for Indigenous Peoples. If you look at the different policies that they have, are sometimes in conflict with one another because of government interest without looking into the interest of the indigenous peoples. That's why there is this constant struggle, and the IPs themselves are continuing to, to lobby with the government to respect their rights, to go back to the basic. That's why the IPRA law. The IPRA law is the fundamental law that we should be reminded of, because it highlights the basic, uh, responsibility of the government to on how to protect the rights of the IPs. And in terms of resources, how to continue if there is not much resources within government. The government has a lot of resources The problem is that of corruption. Um, I have ex- I've seen it myself. Many politicians of they are how they are um, capitalizing the the IPs. No? Like for example, just to give you an example, the government has this program on providing scholarship for the indigenous peoples in certain area. And during budget hearing, a congressman or congresswoman would say, "Okay, I'll support your budget for the National Commission for Indigenous Peoples, for example, if you give me part of your budget for scholarship to my district, instead of giving the organization to choose who should be who should receive the scholarship. These politicians would like to be part of choose I mean uh, of identifying their own scholars, and sometimes they are not actually indigenous peoples. So these are some of practices that are actually we continue to experience. The IBIS continue to experience. Resources are there. It's just a matter of how the resources uh, are used properly. And another thing also is the value of the nonprofit organizations. I think the advantage in the Philippines is that we have almost 6,000 NGOs, nonprofit organizations in the Philippines, and a number of those are actually working with the indigenous peoples. And it's a matter of how the government and the civil society can work together to continue creating more meaningful, doable, and innovative programs for and with the indigenous peoples. And lastly, what is more important is to strengthen the IP's capacity to help themselves. Because I believe that they have the wealth, they have the knowledge, they have the land. No? For them, the land that can actually be um, um, that can, if well used of, then it can actually help them and create more programs for themselves.
Thank you, Ben. I think I agree with you. Resources are there. The government continuity, yes, it affects. But there is also one other factor, perhaps, and that is mindset of the people. And this is a question raised by Tanaka Haruto. And it says that habits die hard. Other than changing policies or regulations, how can you change people's mindset? People still might uh, look down, and perhaps they was not even aware about discrimination. So, what in your experiences, what can you do, or what have you done about this mindset or habit of people?
You know, that's actually my present advocacy now.
Mm.
How to highlight the positive side of the indigenous peoples and see the IPs as a wealth of this country instead of looking them as poor people. We can look at them in a different way by looking at them as a wealth of the country. And that would also change our attitude towards them. We could see them as people who are rich in values, in knowledge that can teach us, instead of looking at them always as people who don't have, because they have so much to share to us. They have so much to share, and to non-indigenous peoples like ourselves. And if we have that kind of mentality, then we can also see our attitude towards them would also change. We'll be looking the IPs as people who can actually create positive solutions in responding to societal problems. And that's exactly the reason why we put up the Pamulaan Center, because we would like to highlight that. And we would like to see how these young IPs, the young generation of the indigenous communities, would have that capacity to face the world, that they too have something to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And in fact, it connects with one of the questions. This is for by Carlito Impas. And in fact, the question is to the APO. And it asks whether there are programs to support the indigenous peoples in the Philippines based on your presentations. And allow me to answer this, Ben. And my answer actually, we are now including what we call inclusive productivity. Yeah. And it means that that productivity will have to benefit all peoples. The productivity movement will have to be supported by all sectors of the society. We have actually been thinking we're having programs for those people with different abilities. We are also looking for greater women, for example. But to answer Carlito Impas, in fact, this is where we are connecting. Why we are connecting with Benjamin, in the sense that how can we learn from you and vice versa. Perhaps I could also share with Ben later on the productivity techniques, tools, methodology that might also be of practical use to the Pamulaan College, for example. So
Yes, that
that
will
I hope
very help.
can have a synergy on that, and we would like to continue the cooperation.
You
So
know,
Ben, I continue.
I would like to share with you this one program that I forgot to mention in my presentation, because this is one way of, because there was this question about integration. And you know, 8 years ago, because of our experience in implementing Pamulaan, we thought of forming this network of government college institutions. And the program is called NICH, for National Indigenous Coalition for Higher Education. We are now on our ninth year, and we have about 40 plus universities who are involved in this advocacy. And just recently, the Commission on Higher Education invited us to sit down in that in crafting programs for the integration of indigenous knowledge into our mainstream education program in the college level. And for me, that's one very important work that Pamulaan is now doing in the government system. Thank you.
Ben, actually, we have overshot the time, but I hope you don't mind that we continue with one last question, and then after that, I would like also to invite you for your closing remarks, and that is this question from Nepo Jerome Benter, and given the success of the Pamulaan, has there been any harmonization of the initiative between the Pamulaan system and the Department of Education, Indigenous Peoples Education Office curriculum. Where are you now in terms of that, combining or aligning the Pamulaan and the Department of Education's curriculum?
Very beginning, when the government has finally into this promotion of indigenous education, we are already part of it. And in fact, we have this program called LIP, and that is offered for both teachers working in the Department of Education and in private schools for ongoing formation of teachers. And we regularly conduct trainings for teachers on school management and how to integrate indigenous knowledge into their curriculum. And for the past years, Pamulaan has become a hub, for benchmarking of dep ed schools who would like to continue in their advocacy on IP education. And we have published a lot of books and textbooks in particular, and we are sharing that to the different government schools. And right now, we have assisted about 350 community schools, both private and public schools, and in developing their curriculum and also in developing their learning materials. And we have this coalition also. If we have a coalition for the college, we also have a coalition for the basic education. And many of the members are supervisors, managers, and teachers from the Department of Education. And that's our continuing commitment to continue supporting, even if we are a nonprofit organization, we would like to continue what the government, particularly the Department of Education, have started already. Because we were together, in establishing in drafting the national policy framework on indigenous education.
Thank you, Ben. I was intending that have been the last question, but actually another one pop up, and I think this will be very important for the viewers also to listen to your reviews. And so allow me to add one more question before we close, and that this is about leadership. And it's from Giho Kim, and it says that it is not just about indigenous peoples, but overall, what is your thoughts about leadership? I think I read one of the articles when you passionately explain about leadership, and it is about the ability to empower others and give new opportunities for growth. And you have you explain what is growth. I would like very much you to share your views on that, and including your explanation about the growth. Please, Ben.
Okay, that's one of my favorite topics actually, because what really motivated us in putting up the Pamulaan Center for Indigenous People's Education is really that it's the 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 aspect on leadership, because we believe that the IPs will have a very bright future if their leadership skills, their leadership potentials are given the opportunity to develop. And in my 32 years of working with the indigenous peoples, I really believe that the best way to gauge that the work is successful is if you are able to train people to become more than what you can do, which means for the indigenous peoples to become the best who they can be. And that's, I think, our lifetime commitment to strengthen the leadership capacity of the indigenous peoples. Because as I have said, there is so much in their value systems that we could learn from in leading people. And I summarize these principles in in an acronym for growth. GROWTH. Growth means is that the opportunity to lead people is a grace in itself. Therefore, we should be very grateful that we are given such an opportunity to accompany, to live, to journey with the indigenous peoples. It's not all people, it's not, I mean, not all are given that opportunity. Therefore, if we have that kind of mentality or attitude of being grateful of the leadership opportunity that is given to us, then we become more, we strive more, we do more because we are given such grace, such that's the first G, the grace. The second is responsibility. Whatever grace, whatever opportunities that you are given in leading people, you are supposed to be responsible of everything. Actions, you know, in your relationship with them, with the IPs and among the IPs. Second, thirdly, rather, is openness, to being open. Openness to learn from the IPs. Openness to learn from one another. Openness to new things. Openness to combine the old, the traditional knowledge and the new knowledge to come up with new and doable solutions to problems. Thirdly is willingness, the willingness to live in a simple life. Simplicity is a core, one of the core values of the indigenous peoples. And I think that's a very important for a leader to live in a simple life. The willingness to share what you have to others. Because the indigenous peoples are very concerned on others, not just on themselves. So there is always that willingness to give to others, to share. And at the same time, the willingness to receive. You know. So the humility, the, that involves about openness. The openness to learn, the openness to, I mean, the openness to many things. And the W is the willingness to work with others, the willingness to work in a team, the willingness to be part of other people. And that's very, very real in the leadership system of the indigenous peoples. And the trusts, the IPs are very trusting people. You know, when I started my development work with the IPs or my work with the IPs 32 years ago, I was still very young. And yet I was able to experience the real trusts from them. And therefore, the best in me came out because of that experience of trust that I had with them. And therefore, that's the kind of attitude that we also would like to instill in our trainees, and students in Pamulaan, for them to trust themselves and to trust one another so that the best in themselves can come out. And lastly, hope. Leaders are supposed to be bearers of hope. And I think that's what, at least my experience and also our experience with the IP leaders, there always sense of hope in their words, in their dealing with one another, in their outlook about the future. And for them, leadership is an ongoing, is that's why it's growth, is an ongoing relationship between the leader and the people that is being led. It's an ongoing and a growing relationship, a symbiotic relationship between two parties. And therefore, there is always that opportunity to grow and develop together as people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. And we overshoot so much, but I would like to close the session and allow me to invite you, Ben, a message to our viewers. And I would like to actually tap your insights and your foresights about the future plan for the indigenous peoples in the Philippines, and especially in the light of the new normal. So this will be our closing. If you could share your foresights on this matter. Make it short, make it sweet, please, Ben.
Like the rest of the world, the IPs are also facing the same uncertainties about the future. However, this is also the opportune time for us to reflect on what this pandemic is teaching us. I believe that there is a need to reimagine a new way of life by highlighting the IP perspectives on the constant invitation to reconnect, reconcile, and rebuild our relationship with nature and culture. Based on the devastating impact of the pandemic around the world, the IPs have realized the contribution and role of unsustainable way of life and lifestyles and global financial and economic systems. They believe that the continued destruction of Mother Nature, deforestation, excessive exploitation of natural resources, air and water pollution have caused havoc to our lives and brought us to where we are now. In our desire to go back to normal in the earliest time possible, we also face the challenge of understanding the various abnormalities and realities in our leadership and governance, healthcare, food security, trade and economics, education and relationship with people and institutions. The question that we ask ourselves, together with the indigenous peoples, is how we can build a much better society that is more sustainable and resilient. In the coming weeks, we are going to organize a series of dialogues and consultations with various indigenous groups in the country. The objective is to lay out concrete and doable solutions and actions in partnership with various stakeholders, both in government and non-government organizations. Indeed, there is a need for us to work together, guided by the traditional wisdom of the indigenous peoples, practicing reciprocal obligations of responsibility to ensure balance of nature, environment, and people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ben. And I thank also all our viewers for this share staying with us. And this is a very fascinating subject. And I certainly learned a lot from you, Ben. And my hope, my wish is that let keep the passion burning, let's build our synergy. And we will continue. Actually, if there are continuing questions, we would like to continue to communicate with Ben for another, say, 2 weeks, for example. Then hopefully that we can have more discussion and shed more light on this topic. So I close the session. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Ben, a very eloquent speaker, a very distinguished speaker, and recipient of the prestigious Magsaysay Award. Mabuhay, maraming salamat po. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.